Welcome to this video about HTTP parameter pollution. I'm Emmanuel, working here at Aquinet as an architect and developer. So, as I said, this video is going to be about HTTP parameter pollution, but I'm also trying to convey a little bit more of a general concept here. So, I'm hoping that this video will help you thinking outside of your usual box a little bit more. So, without further ado, let's dive right in.
For today, let's look at the API of a search engine. Let's, for example, use duckduckgo.com. If we enter a search term here, let's search for, I don't know, BMW cars for whatever reason. We get results for it. And if we look closely at this application, we see that the URL bar now contains a search term. It uses a query parameter, URL parameter Q, with the value of our search term. Okay, that's interesting. So I guess we can search for things by just using this parameter. Let's search for VW instead. Okay, there we go. So that's also possible. Now what we have here is apparently an API that works by parsing stuff that comes after the question mark here. And that's interesting because this is just a string and it's actually easy enough for me as a human to edit this. The search engine expects this Q URL parameter. All right. Now, but this is just a string, right? I can maybe try and see what happens if I have Q twice in here. And maybe even with a different value. Now, what's going to happen now? You could think of a number of different things that can happen here. For example, it could pick one of the two. It could crash. It could display an error message saying, hey, this is invalid input. I'm not prepared to deal with that. All very reasonable and possible. I mean, okay, crashing is not reasonable, but it's possible. So how does DuckDuckGo behave, huh? You might ask. Let's find out. Oh, that's interesting. It does search for VW. And it also cleared the URL of the second parameter. Now that's very interesting. Okay, picking the last thing on in the string is not completely out of this world, but it's also not completely natural that this is what has to happen. Could very well have behaved in a different way. Maybe let's have a look at a different search engine then. Let's use startpage.com for today. Startpage.com, it's just a search engine. You enter your search term, and by default, it does not use URL parameters. It uses post requests, supplying the search term in the body of the request. That's fine, but startpage.com also supports this style of searching. This is basically a quasi-standard within the search engine world. It's well established and all major search engines, including Wikipedia and stuff like that, do support it. And here we go. Just search for BMW, and we would like to see how it behaves if we supply this parameter twice. Again, just as with DuckDuckGo, first one is BMW, last one is VW. Let's search for this and see what happens. Ooh, there we go. It shows us results for BMW. Now that's different behavior from how DuckDuckGo behaved, right? And what's also noteworthy is it did not change what you see in the URL. We'll come back to that later. Supplying URL parameters twice has a technical term. It's called HTTP parameter pollution, and you can look that up on the web. And it's basically a behavior of web servers or web applications in general and how they deal with the situation. There are many other ways to behave here, as I just said. And for example, you can try it out with Google. I can tell you it behaves different to both of the search engines we've seen today. But HTTP parameter pollution obviously is not a concept for search engines, but for URL parameters in general. Having said that, I think HTTP parameter pollution is just one particular instance of the larger problem of parsers getting supplied a thing twice that they are only expecting once. Or maybe not even necessarily parsers, sometimes it's just the application logic, okay? So you can do the same with post parameters or JSON. Oh, JSON is interesting. Let's have a look at JSON, okay? How about we create a JSON object? I mean, JSON, in contrast to this Q parameter thing and URL parameters, I think is a much more strict standard. Whilst web URLs are some way standardized, the standard isn't really all that strict. JSON is much better there, I think, or at least I'm hoping for, right? So let's try the same thing here. Q parameter value BMW. Let's save that and now use some JSON parsing software, like for example JSON query. JSON query will now, if I call it like this, output the value of the attribute Q of the supplied JSON. And we see correctly displayed here BMW. Okay, fine. Let's see what happens if we now add VW, right? Okay, let's save that and try this again. And we see a value of VW. Now, that's interesting. That's nice to see. It's some behavior, apparently. Okay, maybe this is standard behavior, who knows? JQ can do something also that's also interesting. It can display the object how it understands it. And here we see it does not see the BMW Q attribute. It completely ignores it. That's interesting, let's say this much. I mean, it would make some sense if this is invalid JSON, actually the test JSON that we just supplied. Now, I know this JavaScript is not JSON, and JavaScript might behave different, but let's have a look at how Node.js deals with this situation. Okay, let's do Q BMW. Okay, and now we can do test1.q and see what it says. It says BMW. Okay, let's do test2 and supply a second Q here with a value of VW. All right, and test2.q equals VW. So it's got the same behavior as JSON query has. And also here we can have a look at the object representation, and BMW is completely stripped out of it. Again, same behavior as JSON query. It could be that JSON query is actually based on Node. Who knows? I wouldn't be surprised. Now, that gives us something to think about, right? Maybe the JSON standard is just better than this URL parameter thing. But it turns out it's not. So far, I have been unable to find a JSON parser that behaves different, though I'm sure if you try out a few, eventually you're going to find one. And I'm also sure that some people have written their own JSON parsers, and I'm not sure if they all behave correctly, right? Now, if we look into the JSON specification here, it's RFC 8259. That's the specification we want to look into. And chapter 4 in particular defines how objects work. And let's just read the first paragraph. An object structure is represented as a pair of curly brackets surrounding 0 or more name value pairs or members. A name is a string. A single colon comes after each name, separating the name from the value. A single comma separates a value from a following name. The name within an object should be unique. Now that sounds great at first sight if you have never read those standards. If you have read these standards before, I'm sure you'll have caught it. Uniqueness is optional. There's an intent here for it to be unique, but no specificational guarantee. So our test JSON is actually valid JSON. And It's up to application logic and how to deal with this. And I personally find it slightly nasty from JSON parsers that most of them do not allow this to happen because the JSON standards does leave leeway for that. Let's just fabricate an example together, okay? We're going to lunch. I forgot my money and I ask you to pay, promising that if you send me a link, I'll pay you via that link, okay? And our bank has an interface like that where you can generate a link to send money, and it works that we have a from whom do I want the money. So that's my account, and whom do you want to send it to? Okay, that's your account. And how much should it be? Amount. Let's say 15 units of your favorite currency. Okay, so that's lunch. And now that's a reasonable thing. It's like, okay, it's fabricated. I know it's slightly reasonable. Now you send me this link and I click onto that link, a web page opens, and my bank shows me the transaction that I should confirm, where it says from my account to your account, 15 of whatever currency. Okay, and I say, yes, that's all right. Click OK. Now, let's suppose you're evil. Then what you will actually do is you will start to judge how much money does he have in his bank account. And I'm going to claim that I'm rich here and say 200,000, 2 million. And what can happen now if the application is susceptible to this is that front end passes this URL and shows me the 15. And I say, oh yeah, 15, that's okay, that's what we agreed on. I click confirm, and then the URL gets passed in the backend again, and the backend behaves different because it has a different parser doing the thing, and it actually picks the second amount and transfers 1 million. I'm sorry, 2 million. And that's bad, as you can see. And if you think about it for half a minute, you'll probably come up with like 30, 40 more examples of what could happen. Like you could apply this to authorization. You could apply this to authentication. Confuse systems wherever possible. Show the user one thing, but execute another action. That's basically, with these kinds of APIs, so many things you can think of where you could apply this to if the things are susceptible. And as I said, URL parameters, just one example of where you can apply this to. It's basically every single parsable format that you can think of. Okay, many object parsable formats, or just basically every format that at least has a map in it. Great so far. So now we have the new thing we can try out in applications we see and see how they deal with this. Now the problem is caused because there are multiple systems that pass the user input, and this is user input, it definitely is. And so is very oftentimes your JSON, your XML, your whatnot, your serialized stuff, it's user input. And what you need to make sure is that you have one system that passes the user input. And from there on, you work with an internal representation that is proved against this kind of error happening. Or where you have a well-defined behavior on how to pass this, always take the first one or whatnot. And I said a couple of times we'll come back to this. Now, DuckDuckGo here. We searched for BMW and VW, and what happened is that it changed the URL to only contain the keyword for VW, and that is its understanding of what I asked it to do. And it's representing this understanding now and transferring it around its backend systems probably. It has sanitized my input and agreed on some representation of what I wanted to do. And it has dropped my user input after that. That's an important thing to do. Similarly here with JQ, we can see it obviously has an internal model of what I supply to it, and that only ever pass user input once and then work with an internal representation of it.
So, as you may have noticed, today we basically talked about the concept of stating something twice that's only expected once. I hope that my examples will help you to watch out for this whenever it's important in your current situation. And I can only wish you a good one. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.